Hello and welcome to Newscenter. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The big story this evening, the Supreme Court has rejected the government's move to submit its suggestions in the Adani case in a sealed cover. Calling for more transparency, the court said proposals made by the government to protect investors in the wake of the fall in Adani stocks must be shared with the petitioners. The court has reserved its final order in the matter. We'll discuss this issue in detail with our guests. But before that, let's get in Ashwit Kumar to understand what exactly the Apex Court said while rejecting the government's contention that the suggestions from the government on the Adani matter and the formation of the expert committee should be in a sealed cover. Take a look at what Ashwit has to say.
Well, when the Supreme Court had asked the government as to what its stance is as far as the Adani-Hindenburg case is concerned, the Solicitor General earlier this week had said that it will be filing the government's reply only in a sealed envelope, only for the eyes of the judges, that the government does not want to spook the global markets and the global investors. That matter came up for hearing today, and the Chief Justice of India, Justice Chandrachud, had some interesting words to share. Chief Justice Chandrachud said that he just cannot accept these sealed cover submissions that are being made by the government, that the question here is of an expert committee to review the current framework in place, and that it cannot have this exercise being done under the garb of a sealed cover envelope. Went on to say that there needs to be full transparency, it needs to be a public process, that this affidavit that the government has filed should be shared with all the stakeholders, and that if it is done under the garb of a sealed cover, it will increasingly look like a government committee and not a Supreme Court appointed committee, and therefore, to enjoy full confidence, the Supreme Court said that it will take the mantle upon itself. That's part one. But what will be the focus area as far as this expert committee is concerned? Well, keep in mind that the Supreme Court initially had begun to look at the investor wealth erosion and subsequently the investor protection framework in place. But subsequently, the petitioners, the very many of them, they've raised a number of questions. The role of LIC, of public sector banks, of audit firms, corporate governance norms as far as Adani is concerned, especially with respect to red flags raised by the Hindenburg report. These were all suggestions that have been made in lieu of that expert committee by the petitioners, and the Supreme Court said that while suggestions are welcome to all sides, it will not be accepting recommendations on who should be a part of this expert committee. That is a burden, the Supreme Court said, it will take upon its own shoulders. So towards that end, the Supreme Court reserving its judgment today, the Solicitor General trying to suggest that perhaps the ED or the CBI should be a part of it. But that's a big question. Whether or not they will be a part of it, the Supreme Court will decide. The clarity on the way forward on the Adani-Hindenburg case will be given by the Apex Court when it does finally come out with its orders for today, reserving its judgment.
Right, joining me now to take this forward is Gupta, former Executive Director of SEBI. Also joining us is former Financial Services Secretary D.K. Mittal and Vivek Sood, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court of India. Thank you very much, everyone, for being with us here on CNBC-TV18. Mr. Gupta, if I can begin with you, do you think it was a wrong message that the government sent out by telling the Supreme Court that it would want to limit the remit of the expert panel that the court wants to set up? It wants its suggestions, it wants its recommendations on the probe ahead to be in a sealed cover. Do you think the government should have been more transparent in this exercise?
See, I'd say I will always battle for transparency, but I think if I read the previous happenings in Supreme Court and today, there seems to be some disconnect, because Supreme Court that very day, first day, said that they do not want to create an impression that SEBI has not done this job or SEBI is not doing its job, something like this. So that's why something came like that, what will be done in the seal cover. But I would say that there is no way that any probe can be done by seal cover and the committee's name is hidden by the seal cover and the agenda is done by seal cover. It has to be in a transparent manner. So I would welcome that everything should be done in a transparent manner. However, again, and I would say that caution has to be taken that no signal should go out at all that the regulatory system of the company is weak if it is not weak. See, the problem is this: just by allegation doesn't make my system or the country's system weak. It is only if the allegations are found to be correct, then you can say that probably there was a weakness. So at present, the starting point should be that the systems were not weak, the regulator was not weak. And then we see that within these regulations, how it has happened. And if there's any change, if there is a need for doing something beyond that. As I understand today, the biggest weakness that we have in the system is this, that the short position which is created outside Indian regulator domain. How to take care of that?
Right. Important points there, Mr. Gupta. Let me now go across to Mr. Vivek Sood. Mr. Sood, the court had remarked, because the Solicitor General, the government, made this contention that the impact on markets is zero. The court remarked by saying that, going by what you said, but the statistics show that investors have lost lakhs of crores worth of wealth during the last few days. So, do you think the government could have really taken this stand? What more needs to be done now in order to protect investors, strengthen the current regulatory ecosystem?
In my view, see, when these matters are argued in the court, both the sides are free to raise as many arguments as they have. So, these are arguments put forth on behalf of the government, and I see no difficulty in making this argument before the court. Ultimately, the court will decide. Whenever there's a dispute between two parties, as in this case, both the sides are entitled to raise as many arguments as possible. So, I see no harm in the government raising this argument that, that it should be in a sealed cover. Ultimately, the court's view will prevail. The court has said, no, we want transparency. We don't want to give an impression that this inquiry committee is a sponsored committee of the government of India. So I see no difficulty in these arguments being raised in the court. Now, that's one aspect. See, the other aspect is, I must say, on the Hindenburg report, after all, it's only a media report. And in the eyes of the law of evidence, it is not admissible, or it is not a conclusive piece of evidence. We all know newspaper reports have no evidentiary value unless the author of the report deposes in the witness box. But having said this, I'm happy that the Supreme Court will appoint an inquiry committee, an independent inquiry committee, and ultimately, whatever allegations have been made will be inquired into, and the unvarnished truth will come out. There are allegations, there are counter allegations. Right. We can't take the report as gospel
Mr.
truth
Gupta?
at the time.
Right. Mr. Gupta, to get you back in, what, according to you, now the Supreme Court has made it very clear that we are not going to be accepting the government's recommendations blindly. We will decide what this panel will be, the remit of the panel would be. What, according to you, should be the four walls or the criteria basis which this panel should move ahead? If you were to give a few suggestions on what the Supreme Court appointed panel needs to do now in order to strengthen the regulatory ecosystem, strengthen the audit of financial documents of companies, what would that be?
See, first thing I would say that my request to Supreme Court would be, do not fall for any side's argument, whether it is the petitioner's side or it is the government side. Take your independent judgment. That is one. The second thing is this, the Supreme Court must look into the systemic issue. Rather than an individual company's issue or a group of companies issue, it should be a systemic issue, that how this is possible. And the third most important point, as Mr. Sood said, Hindenburg report is just an opinion of a gentleman. Now, it is not a gospel truth. And I was reading somewhere the recommendations that have petitioners given are so vast and so strong that I would say that they need not be accepted at all, because in that case, you are going to shut all the commercial activity in the country. If you ask any loan beyond 500 crore to be sanctioned by a committee, then overseen by another committee, you are going to stop all the commercial activity. Second, with the bankruptcy law that has come in for last 6-7 years, I think the credit system in the country has become so good that neither the borrower nor the lender are prepared to do anything which is going to put them into trouble, because the borrower will be losing the control of the company, and the banks have no leeway in not putting the company in a watch list or NPA list if there is any default. So I would say Supreme Court must be very cautious in accepting all those things which are going to put your wheels of commerce or wheels of development 10 year, 20 year back.
Right. But Mr. Gupta, do you also feel, and would you agree that possibly SEBI and the government should have been more transparent when it came to information regarding the Adani Group? Because there have been a lot of questions asked about a parliamentary reply in 2021 when the government replied that yes, SEBI is conducting an inquiry into the Adani Group, whether the group's companies are complying with the SEBI regulations or not. So do you feel that the outcome of that inquiry and even how the government is proceeding in the Hindenburg matter, because there has been an impact on the markets, on the Adani Group stocks, do you think there should have been more transparency, more responses from the government and the SEBI?
See, there is a very fine difference between transparency and nakedness. The issue is very clearly SEBI keeps on conducting many inquiries. And unless until we say that all inquiries, all investigation should be in public domain, you can't say that one particular investigation should be in public domain. If there is a law of the land that whatever SEBI investigates should be in public domain, I am for it. But if there is no law, then you cannot say selectively that company A investigation should be in public domain or company B should not be in public domain. Second, I do not know what is the status of inquiry that SEBI has conducted or what has happened. But if SEBI would not have found anything that was in any way transgressing the law or something like the violation of any regulation, there was no need for SEBI to take action. So we are not sure whether the inquiry is complete or not. The other thing that I would say, when the government made a statement that there is no impact on the market, it is the broader market. It is not on a particular 4 or 5 companies of Adani Group. There was no impact. But the second thing and most important thing I would say, that it is not only the retail investor which have lost. It is the Adani themselves have lost too much. So, and the retail investor, if you look at the shareholding pattern, probably retail investors have been there prior to 2020. So if you say their profit and loss, they have lost money from the notional profit, but not from the capital they have invested. But that is always a point of debate, that how do you calculate your profit and loss. But I would say again and again that there has to be a systemic study, and whatever panel is appointed, the panel must get into this, that how to keep Indian market away from such shocks where somebody sitting in Timbuktu gives a report, is not subjected to Indian law and has created position which is not subject to Indian law. So you are out of Indian law and you want everything to be done by the government.
Okay, now let me go across to Vivek Sood. Mr. Sood, give us a sense of how this matter will now proceed legally in the courts. You may debate, you may have a difference of opinion when it comes to the Hindenburg report, but the fact is it's before the Supreme Court now. The Supreme Court will form an independent panel, an expert panel on this. The matter has been reserved. So what are the likely questions that the government, that the Adani Group, SEBI could be asked in the days to come, questions arising out of the Hindenburg report?
It's impossible for me to predict what is going to happen in the future, but the Supreme Court will appoint an independent committee of experts to probe into the allegations in the Hindenburg report. That inquiry committee will be independent. They will hear all the sides. They will give opportunity to all the sides to adduce as much evidence as possible. And then after appreciating the evidence, they will come out with a report. Based on the report, you have so many agencies like SEBI or the enforcement agencies, depending upon the inquiry report and the evidence that comes to light, all these agencies will get activated and they will perform their duties to the best of their ability. It is impossible for me to predict, what will be the line of investigation, what will be the line of interrogation, whether there would be any prosecutions or arrests, etc., etc. It is premature for me to predict.
Right. But any responses which you feel that the government should come up with in the days to come? Mr. Sood?
In my view, we have independent authorities like SEBI, we have the law enforcement agencies, we have the enforcement directorate, the income tax department, etc. So the government will not have a direct role in all this that's happening. See, we will have an inquiry committee of experts, that will be formulated by the Supreme Court, and it will be independent. You have all these agencies that will take actions in accordance with law. In my view, the government by itself, per se, will not have much of a role to play, except maybe answer the questions of the opposition in Parliament. The government is responsible to the Parliament, to the people of India. Apart from that, we have agencies, we have systems, we have a legal system, we have the law enforcement agencies, we have the principles of natural justice that are available to all the parties. So I'm sure the law will take its own course.
All right, we've run out of time, but Vivek, Sood, Mr. J.N. Gupta, thank you very much for joining us here on CNBC-TV18 News Center, giving us your view on how the controversy around the Adani Group has transpired in the Supreme Court and the view taken by the Supreme Court on formation of an expert committee as well. Meanwhile, the shares of the Adani Group companies continue to remain under pressure. 6 of the 10 group firms managed to close higher, but despite this, the group saw its market cap erode by 10,000 crore rupees today. Overall, Adani Group's market cap stands at 8.5 lakh crore rupees. It has lost nearly 11 lakh crore rupees since the Hindenburg report was released. Meanwhile, billionaire investor George Soros questioned Prime Minister Modi's silence and said the controversy can spark the revival of democracy in India, following which Union Minister Smriti Irani hit back, accusing Soros of attacking India and attempting to weaken democracy. Listen in.
Adani is accused of stock manipulation and the stock collapsed like a house of cards. Modi is silent on the subject, but he will have to answer questions from foreign investors and in Parliament. I may be naive, but I expect a democratic revival in India.
George Soros, an international entrepreneur who hedges bets against many countries, has now declared his ill intentions to intervene in the democratic processes of India.
All right, on that note, we're heading into a short break, but don't go anywhere. We get you the latest news when we're back.
Let's you and me